Welcome everyone to the November 2023 Talga Group Quarterly Investor Webinar. Today we'll hear a presentation from Talga's Managing Director Mark Thompson about the group's recent updates. Following Mark's presentation, there will be a Q&A. Thank you to everyone who submitted a question ahead of time. You can also submit a question during the presentation through the Q&A function on Zoom. We've received quite a few questions, so if we don't get to your question, feel free to get in contact with us after the webinar at info@talgagroup.com. I now welcome Mark Thompson, Managing Director of Talga Group. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Alex, and hello, everyone. First of all, apologies if I reach for the tissues. I've got the sniffles I just got off the flight back into Australia last night and come back with the customary cold from the romance of travel. So yeah, apologies if I'm a bit snuffly on the call today. So let's get stuck into it. The usual format. I'm trying to for shareholders that may be fairly new to Talga, I still want to step through where we're at with individual components of the company as a whole, but of course leave lots of time to answer those questions. And this is what we're trying to do now each quarter. So let's commence that. So let's first of all introduce, in some ways, why we do what we do, or what the opportunity is for Talga regarding graphite and the anode business altogether. Importantly, the recent news just from a few weeks ago that the Chinese authorities are going to require permits for producers of certain graphite products to export from China was a pretty significant event. The last time I saw tariffs getting applied to material was about 10 years ago, and actually graphite prices shot up by about 300%. The rest of the world was in a massive panic because it's probably the most restricted part of the battery supply chain is in China. Interestingly, if we reflect back on 10 years ago, most of those graphite uses were for industrial products. They weren't actually for batteries. Today, batteries are now consuming the bulk of graphite, or it's over 50% for the first time in history, and that's only just getting started. So yeah, it's a much more significant event now. And while graphite is only about 10% of the value of a complete lithium-ion battery cell, there's nearly 99% of that graphite is via China. Here on this graph, you can sort of see the different components which are primarily produced through China. Anode is the far and away the most exposed, and this includes synthetic graphite as well as natural. In the natural supply chain for batteries, it's nearly 99%. Any material you see coming through Korea was once shaped, purified material that was made in China, and they just export it and then coat it in Korea. Likewise, so that would be groups like POSCO, for example. In Japan, likewise with groups like Mitsubishi, they're purchasing or producing their own materials within China and exporting it, and then they're coating it in Japan. So yeah, it's probably in some ways the numbers may work out that it's worse than rare earths for its concentration within China, and that's why the news about China putting on any sort of restrictions, which in this case were mostly for natural, there were some synthetic, but the grades of synthetic were not so much battery grade issues, they were more like nuclear grade. But for the natural, it included the shaped purified material that Korea, Japan, and essentially the rest of the world's batteries that use natural material rely on. So it's pretty significant, but it's just a little shot over the bows at this point, I think. Anyway, so what you've got is incredible concentration of all graphite production that ends up in battery cells is concentrated through China. Whether that material is imported as a raw material from somewhere else is about 30% of their supply. But then by the time it leaves China, you're talking about 99% of natural graphite that ends up in a battery has come through China. And why you might consider that that's a problem is because it's not done in a very clean way. This is some Tesla data from their latest sustainability report on an LFP battery, which is being used in more and more in some of their models. And what you're looking at here is the CO2, the carbon footprint per cell. You can see the lithium represents only 2%, The graphite represents 34%, which is far and away the largest of the materials, with iron at 1% and phosphorus at 3%. So there's a huge amount of electricity, and the carbon footprint is generated in making the cell from the assembly and the production of the cell. But actually, far and away, the largest part of the LFP footprint is in the graphite. And anyone that has been to China, as we have, and seen synthetic plants, and realizes that these CO2 numbers are actually usually ignoring the actual the precursor. So that the oil and the coal precursor is actually usually not included in these numbers. So if you did a true cradle to grave, like we do in our LCAs, you'd actually see that this number would probably be worse. And that's why I've interest to OEMs, not necessarily cell makers so far, because cell makers don't care, frankly, so much, but the OEMs certainly do. So they're starting to get a higher interest in that. So this is where Talga comes in. We're really conceived as a solution to these problems. We differentiate ourselves by being totally mine to anode integrated. So we are an anode company. We produce different battery materials, actually, and we're putting those into commercial production with one of our deposits that happens to be in Sweden. But the company overall is actually a battery material supplier. And the base in Europe is fairly unique in that there's no one else this advanced with that sort of exposure to that market. And of course, it can spread from Europe around the world. And it's probably more globally significant than people realize, which I can talk to later. So here's a map of North Sweden, where we're located, just to sort of put those of you who don't know. So we're in the north of Sweden, in between Norway and Finland. We have a plan down at the refinery at Luleå on the Baltic Ocean there to produce just under 20,000 tonnes a year of anode for 24 years. And that's from just a fraction, that's from less than 10% of our existing resource base. We just haven't got around to drilling out the rest of the deposit. Currently, we're at 35 million tonnes at just under 24% grade, which is one of the highest in the world. But interestingly, the exploration target on that is about 170 million tonnes. And that's just for the top 100 metres, I think, around the deposit. So there's huge amounts of growth still there to go. Collectively, our other deposits, including Jalkanen and Ratajärvi, mean that we own the biggest natural graphite resources in Europe, and certainly the highest grade and the highest anode yield that we can see anywhere in the world. So you could say, well, who cares? Everyone's got a graphite deposit. Well, it's a bit different. One is that it's super high grade. Two is that all of the flakes are battery size, so there is no industrial byproducts. So that's what I mentioned about anode yield. We produce, therefore, about 20% of our rock ends up in the final anode product, which is very rare in the world of natural graphite. Also, its location, obviously, it's a very first world stable sort of jurisdiction, but the road and the rail link directly down to our customers in Europe. So if you are making cells in France or Germany or Poland or Hungary, we don't actually have to ship. You can ship if you want from the port there, but actually you've got road and rail direct. So auto companies are very interested in this now, hearing that you're within 1 to 2 days drive or delivery from cell makers, that they're related to. So that's very useful. We currently have got a scoping study to go to over 100,000 tonnes of anode production per year. But I would say that that's, we're continuously reviewing that in light of demand from our customers, which is far in excess of that, both within Europe and globally as well now. This is an artist's view, but based on the engineering drawings of the plant that will produce the anode. Essentially, one truck every 12 hours comes in with concentrate, puts it into the purification plant over here on the right, and then it goes through with our processes a little different. We've got some tech in there that essentially does the shaping and the purification and the coating in a fairly innovative and clean way. The entire thing, the mine and the refinery site, is running on hydropower. It's low cost, it's stable. Importantly, it's sustainable. This refinery site now we own. It's fully permitted, and we're starting construction on it, which is one of the reasons why we're raising some money recently in the SPP. But yeah, it's very interesting. This is we've already been operating a small scale version of this plant in Luleå. This is a couple of kilometres away behind it, where the location is. It's an area that was previously cleared for the steel industry, actually, to expand back in the 80s, and it was never used. So now the municipality has developed it as an industrial plant. I was here just a couple of days ago, And it was amazing to see the power substation over the road, and a lot of other companies now starting to expand. This is actually my pick out the window of the car. This is only one small portion of the site. Drainage, pipework, power coming in. It's 40 megawatts up over the road. As I said, there's a concrete batch plant. You can see in the background there. It's just a small portion of the site, which it's pretty substantial. We've contracted about 40 megawatts of hydropower for the site at the moment, and there's more things on the way. So this is we have the ability to do construction here. Obviously, we want to dovetail that in with the mine site, but we also to keep to timelines and make sure we're ready for what we're very confident about what's coming up, is to do as much development on this site as possible in a very timely manner. And also bear in mind that this site has its own value, as well as being Europe's first permitted graphite purification site. So this has caught the attention of some of our potential partners. Up at the mine, for those of you that don't know, this is a view of what the mine would look like at about year 8 to 10, about halfway through its life, where you've got some pits in production, other pits have been backfilled. So it's a dig and refill operation. At the end of life, there's a plan for this all to be closed, backfilled, the solid facility there, the waste facility, to be covered over, revegetated, and the mill gets taken away. So you have to put bonds in and plan for that closure, even though we'd obviously be very confident of being able to expand the site over time, depending on the local permitting situation and rights. Important to recognise that the environmental permit for this was actually approved by the courts. And in Sweden, you have this you sort of have this long tail. So you go up the curve, as it were, over many years of surveys and work and permits. You get your environmental permit. But then in a way, that isn't the end of it. On the way down, you have this multiple stages of appeals that are allowed. That's the legal system there. And right now, there's an appeals that were rejected by the appeals court. They have the ability to put the same appeals or put some new appeal into the Supreme Court, and that process is underway at the moment. When that's finished, then that process is at an end, and then the environmental permit goes into full force. We'll no doubt talk about that in question time later. On project financing, been very successful, to be honest. The 60-40 debt equity plan has gone really well. We had an excess of demand for the debt. The European Investment Bank cornerstoning with 150 million euro there, and we have completed the consortium, which we can't name yet until we do all the final terms, all signed off on, which in some ways related to the mining permit and other progress as well. But yeah, we've certainly got in excess of what our target there, with a bunch of really good European banks, who sometimes are also related to the customers as well. So we've got very good visibility on what's going on, and other project partners we're working with, which has had a positive influence on getting some debt offered by export credit agencies. So it's a mix of sort of, shall we say, lower cost, very competitive commercial debt, export credit agency debt. So it's designed to be a consortium with really good flexibility, covering off on all the functions that we need over time, but also being quite well as low cost as possible compared to other ways. And the equity, we've got multiple areas that we're looking at there, from state aid to strategic partners, customers, and other groups as well, and also institutional investors interested in participating in the building of this project. So yeah, when we say equity, we mean there's a whole range of different. We just mean non-debt in reality, and the details of that will come out when finalised. Importantly for both battery cell makers, but more so for the auto OEMs, is the fact that we own our own technology. We're not licensing anyone else's stuff at the moment. We have very active intellectual property process of identifying IP within the company, and then to take it forward. We are very careful about what we patent, what we don't, versus know-how that can stay secret, shall we say, and also patents that are very useful and valuable in other ways. And there's some valuation of that going on right now, as other companies are interested in licensing actually our tech for things. That may change in future, but essentially we're very proud of what we've done there. And certainly I've just come back from taking some pretty significant potential shareholders and strategic investors and partners to the site up in Sweden. So I was in the Arctic a few days ago with them. But one thing that stood out after the visit was not only do they like the commodity and they like the space and like what we're doing in various ways technologically and the fact that we're vertically integrated, the big thing that came across was people. And it just makes me very proud that we've got enough quality people that whether I'm there or not, it's not about me. There's different qualities of lines of our people at all levels, from the labs to admin to whoever they interact with. They're just finding a really mature, advanced, commercially ready company that we get audited by some of our auto OEM potential customers have come and audited our systems and labs and at the EVA plant and other parts of the operation, and they'll come away very happy. And it makes me very proud that we've got that capability. And people don't really get it until they come to site. They have to physically see the steps and the components that go into what we've built and how ready it is. And yeah, it makes me extremely proud that we've got that depth of skills and talent throughout different levels of the company, and we've got a lot to be proud of. That's a huge part of what we've built in Talga so far. So on the Telnode itself, mostly Telnode C, although we've got Telnode SI action as well. I guess just to deal with something on the left-hand side, what are we talking about here? The material's validated by many companies we're partway through qualification processes with, or in fact, some we've ended the qualification process and we're in commercial negotiations about different products for different parts of the world. And this is really a triangle. People think that it's all about auto companies, like they see deals with the Teslas of the world or something like that, or some of the lithium guys had offtakes with auto companies. What they forget is in the early days of the lithium industry, for example, when it comes to batteries and opening up things like hard rock lithium or even brine lithiums around the world, is all the initial financing was done from Chinese cell companies or Chinese off-takers and trading companies. There was no auto OEMs. Even 3 or 4 years ago when when lithium was actually in the doldrums, a lot of mines got started. It was all based on Chinese downstream money and not the OEMs. They came in later after things boomed and the prices shook them all up. So, graphite in some ways, may follow the same route. It may not. Maybe we can get the autos involved earlier. They're not really the main customer. It's really a triangle. The other customer is your cell maker, and the cell maker makes whatever they want normally, and just the car company has to take it. So the cell makers of the world, and here what you see is a whole bunch of cell makers building gigafactories in Europe. Nearly 100% of their materials going into this is via China. It's incredible that there's literally hundreds of billions of dollars of investment now, both in America as well as Europe, and hundreds of billions. I think it's 170 billion has been allocated just under the IRA in the US alone. Less than 1% of that was for the material supply chain. Incredible. Has to change. It will change. These factories are empty. They have nothing to put in them except Chinese material. And this is why that Chinese permitting restriction was so effective at scaring the heebies out of the autos. The cell makers are just going along with it. But the auto guys have got a more strategic sort of thinking, and they were really shaken up by that news, and the phone started ringing hot straight away. And the other customer in that triangle for us is actually other anode manufacturers that are already established out of Asia mostly, that are playing a role in supplying all of these factories in Europe. They also present customer opportunities for us, not just in blending, co-making of products, strategic investment, sharing of sites, sharing of chemicals, sharing of energy and temperature, or sharing of waste streams. There are companies that are looking to come into Europe to supply these companies that they already make materials for. They've already qualified graphite anode for some of these companies, but they're looking to sort of replicate that in Europe and they don't know how to do it. They also become potential parties with us. So it's both anode manufacturers, cell manufacturers, and auto OEMs are all of our target. And I think historically what we've tried to do is work directly with the new cell makers in Europe. However, I think that is now expanding with these restrictions to the auto OEMs are becoming stronger potential customers. They've been sitting on the fence for a while, frankly, not, so shall we say, particularly well educated on where materials come from, and not knowing what was in their cells. Now they do. I was meeting a few a day for the last few weeks before I went up to Sweden, all across Germany and France, and also other anode makers who are trying to work out how to come in during a time when Europe is setting up a battery passport guidelines, where you have to publish what your CO2 numbers are for your battery cells. And also they're looking at the threat incoming of tariffs and also the Critical Raw Materials Act, which is forcing end users to have 10% of the raw material made within Europe and 40% of the processing done within Europe for battery materials, which includes graphite. So I would say that things just continue to build up and up towards what you guys as investors and anyone that's a bit sophisticated and has educated themselves about materials versus hype and versus the media. But if you actually, I think a lot of investors are recognizing that Talga's position is one of great strength. It has to happen. There has to be that consumption that's heading that we can supply and grow into quite rapidly once everything's all set up. So it'll continue to back up, ready to sort of burst through. And I just feel like we're very close to that now. And you probably think, yeah, it's been away for a while. But, until this legislation until this permit issue came out of China, it hadn't woken the auto OEMs up. They just are more worried about cost and so forth. And cell makers aren't big drivers of strategic changes, frankly. They follow along with where the customers haven't been in a position to tell them what to do. So the autos haven't really been pushing cell makers around. It's been the other way around. But in light of legislation, especially for the IRA in America, which also means European car manufacturers which sell into America, if they want to get those subsidies on the cars, they also have to be non-Chinese as well. They have to be compliant with friendly country materials in their supply chain. And you guys probably have been thinking this was happening for several years, which it is, but they're only just getting it now. Okay, they're just marketing machines that are miles away from knowing where their materials come from. They're mechanical engineers, they're not chemical engineers. And frankly, they assemble things they don't know how to, they're not really responsible for how to make materials. We are now. One of the other big selling points, I guess, for us to the autos is recognizing that our graphite mixed into any sort of anode material, synthetic or natural from somewhere else, like China, gets cleaner. So you don't have to use 100% Talga material, but the more Talga material you blend into whatever you're making, you lower the CO2. You also increase the charge rate. You actually get fast charge effects, and you can get all sorts of other benefits from it. But the point is that essentially what we do is we export lower emissions into whatever you want to mix our material with. So that's a big win. And of course, it's peer reviewed, the latest work that was done, and it's true cradle to grave. And about 80% or more of our emissions is actually from our suppliers. So we see lots of good potential to electrify materials and the operation to continue driving that number down quite a lot indeed. And that's an ongoing process. Silicon, people are interested in silicon. Some people see it as a threat to graphite. In reality, graphite just keeps growing massively. It's the base load for 99% of all gigafactories being built now and will be operating for the next 20 plus years. However, bits of silicon being dribbled in has an interesting effect. A small amount of silicon can sort of boost energy. So we make a 50% silicon product, which is extremely high energy density, but we make it in a very, very scalable, practical way. And we have quite an advanced position in that, with a pilot plant running and engineering and feasibility studies underway for going commercial, which we are waiting to reveal details on, because we've applied for pretty substantial financial support from state groups and also from customers that we're talking to about playing a role in it and deciding where the plant goes. So yeah, we don't want to talk too much about it until we've got it all lined up to tell you the details. But in general, we are in parallel. We have the silicon working, and so you might say, well, that's a distraction from graphite. Why don't you just do one or the other? Why don't you spin this off or have it as a separate life? Well, right now it's 100% owned. It's pretty valuable. It looks really good. The way it works, it's a great product. It's getting some really good attention, and it's proving very good with our customers. Excuse me. So yeah, I think it's worth pursuing. at the moment, and it's catching up to where the graphite is. The graphene component comes almost as a byproduct of our anode, like some of the waste streams. We also have got some really exciting opportunities to make anode silicon out of our ore, because our ore is mostly silicon, or silicate. So there's some programs running on R&D to use our own silicate byproduct from the mining for the anode to be the silicon anode silicon. Right now we use some sources within Europe, but that would bring it even more in-house, and potentially we'd obviously only do it if it was economically better. Certainly it looks better from a CO2 point of view as well. On the graphene side, we haven't stopped working in that area, although it's fair to say that a lot of it was so mature that it takes a pretty light touch. A lot of interest in conductive additives, which exposes us to the big volume of the cathode market. There's been some interest in solid state, although that market's super slow and we don't have to do much there. But there's been a big interest in recycling. Recycling of used graphite anodes doesn't really happen right now. It's possibly technically and commercially viable, not viable, and probably CO2 not viable as well. But we can potentially use that material in our silicon anode product. So in that way, we can help the situation, and it provides an extra service to our customers. So that's looking good as well. I talked about the pilot plant for silicon that we're operating in Germany at our Rudolstadt facility. Team there is doing great. We're learning a lot from it. Nothing like having a pilot plant to produce not only materials, significant scale samples for your customers, but get all the details you need to make that jump up to a commercial plant. So that's operating very well. And I talked about the recycling material, which has sort of got that two streams. You've got people that want to just take material like this, which is actually in the background. This is one of our photos of some of the trial piloted material for a customer, and we just scraped some stuff up there to show it for the customer. But you would just take this off with water jets. Basically, simple hydromet processes can remove unused graphite. So that's from the scrap from production of battery. So when you have the anode foils running through the plant, they're trimming the edges off, and you're getting some production scrap. You're also getting production scrap on rolls of material that have problems at the plant. So in the early days of cell factories, they have huge losses, just ginormous. So this is a good potential to look at that material. Now, look, it's already going 99.95% graphite, so it's not a big deal to purify it or try and reuse it, to be honest. But it does have binders and other stuff in it. So there's some skills to be made with it, but it's not the big volume. The big volumes is what will come out of used batteries later on. And that material, once you've intercalated a lot of, you form a lot of compounds inside when it's lithiated, and over time you get a lot of metals and oxides form. Very, very difficult to purify. And when you do, and then you run an LCR on it, you'll find that it's probably a worse CO2 outcome than just making the material from scratch, and it can't be used in batteries again. It can be used in grease maybe or something else, but it's not going to be reused as an anode. So yeah, there's a lot of work to be done in that area, which needs to be done. And again, you'd say, well, why are we doing it? If we're successful at recycling of even used anode, why not take away from our other anode market? Frankly, the demand is so big, the volumes required are so big. No, it's not going to impact on it that much. B, the really big volumes of used batteries, they're going to be 8 years in cars and then probably another 8 years in house products. So you're talking about 15 to 20 years down the road before really big volumes start building up of used materials. And thirdly, it's very useful to have this as a supply for, as I said, for customers to have another part to our business where potentially you could get some low-grade materials to utilize. And fourth, it's using our tech. So our purification tech, which we've developed for, it's our own purification technology for purifying our graphite concentrate to make into an anode. If that works on this, we're utilizing our purification technology. So you can make a better commercial argument for having the scale of your purification plants or having them in different places and playing a role in that way. And again, being a one-stop shop, which again, cell makers probably don't care so much, but autos love the idea of control. They love control, not the idea of it, but they also love the idea that you're a one-stop shop for almost anything to do with graphite, anode, battery materials, that it can all come to you. They want to talk to you about graphite recycling, as well as graphite anode, as well as silicon, as well as potential solid state, as well as conductive additives for cathodes, as well as maybe graphene coatings for foils, for current collectors, plastic composites for batteries, higher performing lightweight wiring for within the engine, within the motor, stators, things like that. You're a one-stop shop for all of that. So some might say that's all too confusing and you don't know. To us, a lot of our skills that we've developed over the years and our processes and our technology, they're all actually sharing usually 2 or 3 separate small-scale streams of processing tech and knowledge. So for us, it's maybe not as confusing as for others. A resource. We just recently, okay, so some people, it's surprising to me that we still get questions about why you're doing exploration at all. We've already got enough graphite. Well, you have to plan things years and years and years in advance. Plus, of course, if you've got tenure, you can't just let it sit there being fallow. You want to do something with it. So recently we announced some drill results of Vittangi number 6. Why did we drill Vittangi number 6? Well, there was this giant 8-kilometre long zone of conductors up to about 300 metres wide, and no one actually knew what they were. They were probably graphite. They could have been something else. Could have been a big batch of sulfides. Could have been sulfides with copper and gold in it. Who knew? If it was graphite, you had a multi-100 million tonne exploration target, and you didn't even know. You don't even have a single sample from it because it was all sitting under 5 metres of till. So we popped some holes in it, and the part that we drilled was relatively low grade. You got grades up between 10 and 20%, but mostly down around 5 to 10%. But it was significant just to prove that the conductors were graphite. And then from there, we can make decisions whether we want to do more on it versus what we're doing elsewhere in the project. But that part of land is located strategically up against a different road, and it has different landowners in different situations. So for long term, I think we should go back there and we should check it out some more and understand it better. At the same time, we are also looking at different ways we can go about the exploration and expansion, future expansions at Noongarra within Vittangi. And so what we've just done is some geophysical surveys designed to try and pick up the graphite past 500 metres depth. Why? Because in the scoping study, we've got the potential to go underground. The conditions look really good for it. Life of mine OPEX is actually about the same as open pit. So we're just sort of excited about learning about, essentially what you've got is at Noongarra South, people don't realise that part of the resource is 12 million tonnes of indicated and inferred resource. The top 2 million tonnes we converted to a reserve and put into the open pits for our 24-year mine life. The 10 million tonnes underneath that, that's not currently in reserves, and it's not currently converted into anything in the study as such. It forms a little part of the scoping study for Niska, but mostly that's separate to the Noongarra South. So there's an opportunity there that once your permitting is mature at Noongarra South, that you should go down instead of across, and that you could look at opportunities to expand production in future from within the existing permitted land. And lastly, I'll just touch on the lithium. Some funny, timing around when you get some rock chip results or something up to 2%, you've got to say something about it. But we've had this ground down at East Aitik for a while now. We were looking at it for copper. We originally pegged it because it did have a sniff of lithium there. Over the years, we've left it alone, focused on the anode. But recently, I've certainly seen a lot more hard rock value, a lot of value created from the hard rock lithium industry here in West Australia, and from seeing a couple of sites and learning more about it on the side here over the last couple of years, we decided to go back. And it was actually fairly fortuitous in that I was doing this. We did this quick recon survey somewhere, and we flew over the project briefly, and we could actually see these big extensions to the known pegmatites. And the guys went out in the field and confirmed they were pegmatites. And so essentially the bottom line is it's a total grassroots exploration play, but it's got this giant pegmatite. It's about 13, 14 kilometers long, and it's flat, and it's got some lithium in some parts of it, and that's it. That's all we know. So it's either with zero, but if you find that there's more lithium in it, it's a big enough host rock that it could be significant. That's the leverage to it. It's not just some little 100-meter long things. It's potentially very big. So that's what you want, and it's in a developable position insofar as that the landscape looks like this near Vittangi. It's east of the mountains, so you can imagine that there's really not any big hard rock sources near the surface within Europe that are in positions that could potentially be done. So you can imagine that if it's successful and you define some resources there, that potentially you could have the entire downstream all running on hydropower as well. It was a significant opportunity and significant value there. So look, it's just a free kick for shareholders. As far as I'm concerned, we spend very, very little on it. We're currently doing some more exploration on it. We also have got some of the world's best potential lithium partners up there looking at it as well. So it has attracted some attention, and that will allow us to go off and keep doing what we're doing, but have some potential wins there on the lithium side. So there's a little bit of exploration for you. Capital structure still pretty tight, 360 million shares, just under $30 million cash. For those of you that haven't already, you should go look at some of the research that's been published, most recently by UBS, previously by Macquarie, Euroz, Bells, Petra, and in the UK, a little bit out of Longspur Capital. Share structure in the top, particularly in the top 20, hasn't changed much. You'll notice that some of the larger shareholders continue to keep their position. So yeah, there's still a lot of strong support, I'd say, in Talga. We have seen the share price drop off along with the rest of the market. The macro market's been obviously absolutely miserable. However, I would argue that against our peers, we've actually stood up pretty well, particularly through a time of not being able to put out a lot of commercial news, shall we say. Although we've had some permit wins, it's also very frustrating for people I know about the mining permits. But overall, on a global level, Talga's been, until the recent sort of month, I think we've been one of the most highly valued of any listed Western graphite type related company, and we're still one of the largest in the world today. So we're still beautifully positioned for, as the markets turn a little bit, as the essentially as the commodity price itself picks up, as the anode demand keeps going up, and those Chinese fairly short-term temporary dumpings now get cleaned up by the permit restrictions plus the demand sucking it all up. We're just perfectly positioned to grow from here. I suspect I've been long enough. If any of you are overseas or have got any friends and need to talk to us in our other locations, our other offices, feel free. They're published here at the back of the presentation. And with that, Alex, I imagine that we are back to you.
Yes, thank you, Mark, for the presentation and updating everyone on the group's activities. So we're now going to move into the Q&A portion of the session. Once again, thank you to everyone who submitted a question ahead of time or through the Q&A function on Zoom. First question, Mark, when can we expect a resolution for the Nonasfire South mining permit?
Well, it was only just over a month ago, it was in September, that the Court of Appeal found that there were no grounds to grant any appeals. So that happened relatively recently. And now the next step is those same people, or some of them, have appealed to the Supreme Court to state that there were issues around that the Supreme Court should throw it back to the Appeals Court. We don't have any timing on that. We do expect a reasonable and timely approach to it. We did actually see that, while it won't feel that way to people, but if you imagine that back in April we got the environmental grant, by September the first of the Appeals Court actually rejected them outright without a hearing, then the Supreme Court process, we would hope, would have a similar sort of short term, but there's no guidance we're given by them yet. If we get any guidance, we'll let you know. All I can say is that it should be in a fairly timely manner as they do. It's just important to recognise that these are natural processes for them. You're allowed this process, and so of course anyone that's got an objection to the project will utilise that to their benefit. We're just to hold up things rather than with a belief that they're actually going to win. But that's their process, and we have to respect that. And I would say that the fact that the Environmental Court gave a very substantial ruling, nearly 200-page ruling, and don't know if that was visible or not. Some bubble of thumbs up came out. Don't want to do any signs that are not in compliance. The court found that very strongly that there was really that they had all the information they needed to make that decision, and that if anyone wanted to appeal against that, they would have to have very, very strong new grounds to do so. And obviously that did not happen in the appeals court, and they were able to reject those without even having them a hearing because there was nothing new. At the Supreme Court level, we don't have all of the details yet about the appeals that have been lodged. I have seen some of them and seen some translations of them, and I personally am not seeing anything new, but we'll get some advice, some more detailed advice on that. And we'll just got to wait and see now whether the Supreme Court rejects them or sends them back down to the appeals court, which had previously rejected them. So sorry, unfortunately, we can't give any guidance on time. It's very, very, we know it's hurtful or it doesn't make sense to us in our way, but there is just, that's the way the process is over there, and we just have to respect that and keep working with it as best as we can. But the fact that we've come actually this far, this quickly this year is a very good sign. So we have reason to be confident.
Thanks, Mark. And yes, I saw the thumbs up too and was as puzzled as you. So
does it do it for other things?
I'm not sure. We'll give it a shot later. Moving further afield from Sweden, would you be able to give us a broad description of your activities in the R&D lab in Cambridge? That's a question that came through over the Q&A line.
Yeah, to be honest, okay, so making an anode isn't a static thing, actually. You're always working on improving coatings, trying different things. With also, you're always trialing stuff with different parties. Different customers have got different testing regimes. So some may want cycling at 25, others at 45, others at 60. We've got some new 60-degree tests running now. We've got coins and pouch sellability in Cambridge. So you're always both refining your products. You're also doing quality control work. So you're constantly testing what's coming out of the EVA, both actually at our battery location there in Sweden, at the battery lab in EVA, High Ahmed, and also then down in Cambridge. They're constantly testing samples. They're continuously working on silicon, getting feedback from the pilot plant, working on new steps or slight changes and tweaks. So yeah, it's not, to be honest, there's not actually a lot of true R&D going on. There is some, particularly on the magnesiothermic reduction, or I should just say reduction mechanism on the silicon, and some of the R&D we're doing on recycling. So we've got a bunch of funding from the UK government bodies, Automotive Transformation Fund we've worked with, and we're developing new technologies that we can hopefully grow into things both within the UK and also throughout Europe. But it's not all R&D at all, actually. It's the sort of quality control and product refinement you need to have if you're going to work in the automotive industry. Does that help?
Yeah, great. Regarding something that's come out of the UK lab, what milestones need to be achieved to turn Talnode SI into a producing project?
Well, the financial studies, so as a commercial enterprise, it has to stack up. And that is based on the pricing discovery you go through with customers. The customers can only have those discussions when they're happy that the product works to some degree into what they're chasing, what sort of surface area, what sort of energy density, what sort of cycle life. So that's underway and also with pricing discussions and with location discussions as well about where those plants can be built or should be built. Quality of power, in the feasibility studies, we're looking at long-term power prices in different locations, what sort of state aid you can get depending on where you're building these things as well. So they all feed into it. From a product quality point of view, when we've compared it to some of the existing largest current silicon production out of China, our material is very sophisticated and performs very well by comparison. From a pricing point of view, it's very competitive as well because of the way we make it. But yeah, it's a premium price product from a volume point of view, it's going to be a lot less volume than straight graphite because it's a high performance additive. But yeah, the exact numbers will come out in sort of the final studies and so forth. So in some ways, it's certainly qualified already from lab to pilot, and there's no reason why then it can't go to commercial based on what we can see right now. Otherwise, we'd not be working on it. We'd leave it on the back burner for for a rainy day, or you could sell it, could license it to someone. You've got all sorts of options for how to develop a product and a technology that you've made or that you own. But right now, it keeps ticking all the boxes that it should be going into production.
Great. Earlier when you were talking about the Luleå refinery, you pointed out that'll be producing just under 20,000 tonnes per year of Talnode C. Are you able to comment on the ballpark annual production scale of Talnode Si?
Not exactly, not in a straight number. We obviously have some targets that we run through our feasibilities. I think that in the first instance, of course, in the early days, as I mentioned, it's going to have because it's a high power additive. So on an energy like kilowatt per hour basis, you would sell less volume. That's all I would say. So whether it's 2 or 4 or 8,000 tonnes a year versus the 20,000 tonne a year we have in stage 1 at for Vittangi. But the reality is there's really not much of a limit to it. So if the customers and you could finance it and it all made sense to build bigger plants in different places and the total adds up to a much bigger number, there's no reason not to. It's just a matter of what makes sense at what time. But in general, you'll always be looking at a lesser volume than the graphite because you use it just as a small scale additive to the amount of graphite. Like the customers might commonly want it 5, 10, 15%, maybe up to 20% max silica in their final product. It depends on what product they're targeting for cars versus buses versus motorbikes versus drones versus cell phone tower backups, you name it. It's just depends on their own targets. But in general, it's sort of there's no real number I can give you right now.
Great, thanks. Back in Sweden, although a little bit further south than where our operations are, in Norrbotten, can you share your thoughts on Pewterlys plans to build a synthetic graphite anode plant in Sweden?
Yeah, I think that synthetic is always going to play a role in lithium-ion battery anodes. So there's going to be a place for it. It has a mediating effect on cycle life, and it's got some benefits to it when mixed with natural. It depends on the application, how things work. One thing to keep in mind is that historical natural is very different to the modern natural we're making. Like the historical natural was big particles, very subject to flake off and have shorter time life than the modern material that we use, and the way we go about it is entirely different particle sizes and strengths, should we say, in the swelling side of it as well. So synthetic's going to have a role. It would be better if synthetic is made as cleanly as possible, whether it's biological type materials or if it does have to be a petro-based product, at least if it's graphitized on a quality power grid with hydro, like Pewterlys plans are for Sweden, that's a good thing. That means that the supply chain will get cleaner. So that's totally fine by us. Doesn't represent a threat at all. It represents an opportunity for an existing world quality anode maker that may wish to blend or use our material, or for us to use their material because it's cleaner and made locally. So it presents a bit of an opportunity if they go ahead. There are others too in Europe, like Vinode, and there's other groups that make synthetic in Europe that also would be preferential partners for Talga if we need some synthetic in a blend product, or for our material to go to them for one of their customers. So I think the development of synthetic on a quality power grid like in Sweden is to be welcomed. And apart from that, there's really not much else I can say due to confidentiality.
Thanks, Mark. Another question comes through of the Q&A line. What impact would the Inflation Reduction Act in the US have on Talga, if any?
Ooh, that's a big question. Could have a workshop on that. Trying to be really simplistic about it. Number one is some of our customers would make things in Europe that may go to America. And so compliance with IRA is important there. Some of our customers that want to take our material out of Europe and put it into America also have the same issue. Number three is the White House has made quite a few overtures that there is work underway for the IRA to extend into Europe for different materials, that they're working on that with the European Union to look into that. So that would obviously positively affect us. Number four, if we were to set up some downstream production in America for various customers, and there certainly is a big enough market to do that, then potentially the IRA could fund our mine, similar to the way maybe it's funding Syrah in Mozambique and mines that are outside of the so-called friendly country jurisdiction, but because you're doing your downstream production of a strategic and critical battery material in America. So yeah, we're looking into America as well for its opportunities, both for the graphite, but also for Talnode Si. So we're learning more about it, but there seems to be 3 or 4 ways it could impact on us. Some of them may change quickly over time. So there's no point dedicating yourself too much at the moment outside of our current plan and depth of demand in Europe. But certainly we see opportunities with it if it continues the way it is in the States. And certainly there's a lot of it's customer driven, frankly. So if the customer wants to partner up with you on coming there and be part of a funding solution, then that makes it a lot easier, because the IRA is not, there's lots of opportunities, but there's also some pretty significant, I shouldn't say downsides, but there's some restrictions if you want to go that way as well. That's all. So yeah, I think it's actually a good thing. Also, of course, big difference. Europe tries to regulate stuff. America's throwing money at it. I think money's been talking louder. There hasn't been that much manufacturing of materials go over there so far. There's been some, but not that much, not enough to match the downstream factories. And in Europe, they're trying to, I guess, control the imports and develop, the local supply from the ground up, which is a totally different approach. I think we need a bit of both. Pretty hard to start these things up. So we also like the look of that money over there. However, Europe is on the verge of setting up some of those themselves as well via the Critical Raw Materials Act, and you've seen some pretty significant state funding through emergency transition funds and so forth. So yeah, I think we've got to be careful not to push too hard over there when Europe's on the verge of doing it itself anyway. But likewise, I just see them as a linked market. I think they're fairly friendly parties. I think they're strategically setting each other up to benefit from each other's best pros and cons, and we're well placed to look at both.
Oh, great. All right, Mark, we're coming to the end of our session, so we just have time for a couple more questions. Regarding the share purchase plan that's currently open, could you just talk a little bit about why we've decided to do an SPP, well, why we've decided to do it, and why in this particular form?
Sure. When times are tough, you've had a really tough macro market and not a lot of value, but we need to keep to our timelines that we want for our project. There's some you have to sign up to certain contracts. There's gear we want to build. There's power supplies we want to put on. There's drainage we want to install and road contracts to put out. So we're essentially building the project, and we need to just strengthen the balance sheet enough to feel confident about putting some of those orders in and keep things on track and rolling, as you saw earlier with the photograph on the site, on the refinery site. So we're really just starting to build stuff. So we're sort of nibbling away into that, but we don't have the full project funding all lined up yet, or in a position where we can draw down on it, shall we say. So it's mostly about starting to order items and complete things there. So we've made it as small as we can. Therefore, we've offered it to existing shareholders. It's their opportunity to get something before, bigger things will no doubt take place next year. And we've made it as small and non-dilutive as possible while still allowing us to complete our goals. So that's why we did it now. In December and January, if you could hold on, but frankly, December, January, a lot of people are away and the results might be different. Previously, when we've done these to shareholders, it's been very well supported, very heavily oversubscribed, very rapidly. And we like to think that we only do them when there's a good opportunity for shareholders to be a part of it, versus then having a much bigger discount if we included it in. I mean, it was our choice. We could have done some different things, but those things would have been even more dilutive, I think, at this time. So this is what we judged to be the best way to do it. So we chose to do it.
Great. We'll just finish on sort of technical question regarding the SPP. The ASX forms which were lodged refer to a potential maximum of about a bit over 108 million securities being issued. Can you just explain how that relates to the intended sum that we'll be intending to raise?
The SPP is raising, it's targeting 15 million, which is only 15 million shares. But as far as I know, legally, when you do those documents, it's actually a requirement to publish what would be the maximum amount raised. And I think it's based on something like 30% of your total share output or something in a certain period of time. So you actually have to just legally write that as if every shareholder did the maximum amount, what would be the amount of shares you do. And you just have to put it there as a number for the legal requirement in the document. We have no intention of doing that. Obviously, we're targeting 15 million, and that's about it. So no, that's just a legal number. It's not secretly hiding some giant oversubscription-y thing we're trying to do or place some crazy amount.
Okay.
We're trying to keep it tight party. So yeah.
Great. Well, thanks for clarifying. Okay, that's all we have time for today. So thank you, Mark, for your presentation and time answering questions. Thank you, everyone, for attending, and keep an eye out for our next investor webinar. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Good to talk to you.